Hi, my name is Douglas Bonser. I'm a principal solution engineer with Couchbase in the Dallas, Texas area. And in this section, you're going to learn how to get started with Couchbase for mobile. So the topics that I'll be covering in this is first, a little bit about what is Couchbase for mobile, and then introduce a user profile management app that I'll be using to demonstrate the capabilities of Couchbase for mobile. And then going into some more details on the different capabilities mixed in with live coding and demos highlighting those capabilities. So actually probably more coding and demo than slides. So if you're here for the code and the demos, this is the place to be. All right, so first of all, what is Couchbase for mobile? So Couchbase for mobile is comprised of three components. First is Couchbase Lite, and this is our lightweight document database that can be deployed in edge devices. Typically those are phones or tablets, Android, iOS, Windows. We even have pure Java flavors of Couchbase Lite now. So you've got a lot of flexibility in where you can deploy it. But again, typically probably phones and tablets are pretty common. The second piece of Couchbase for mobile is Sync Gateway. So this is what provides the secure transfer or synchronization of data between the edge, where Couchbase Lite is running, and the cloud, where Couchbase Server is running. The other thing that Sync Gateway does is authentication and authorization, basically securing that access to that data and providing data orchestration capabilities. And then again, on the server side, Couchbase Server, which is not so much the focus of this session, but you will see a little bit of it. All right, and then the intent of this is when all three are working together, provides real-time data sync from the edge through Sync Gateway to Couchbase Server and vice versa. Changes made on the server side in real time down through Sync Gateway out to the edge. All right, so I'm going to show this through this user profile management app. Now this is a demo that is available on our website that you could download and walk through yourself. For this, I'll be walking through sort of building out this app, running it on an Android device, and there's going to be two Couchbase Lite databases that are in use. One is this user profile database where the profile information is actually stored, configured to sync with a Sync Gateway instance in Google Cloud, providing that real-time data sync, and then also an embedded database that's included with the app that has information about universities. Make it easy to look up universities while you're creating your user profile. And the deployment for this and what's actually in use behind the demo as you see it, most of the time there'll be one Android emulator running. In some cases there'll be two Android emulators running, but they'll all have the user profile mobile app deployed to them, connecting to Sync Gateway in GCP. Sync Gateway configured to connect to a Couchbase server cluster, also in GCP. And we have a Node.js-based web application simulating a backend system that's running on another VM in GCP, and then utilizing a third-party REST service to send emails. All right, so throughout the demo, you'll see how this all comes together, but these are the different components that you're going to see throughout this demo. Okay, so when we talk about Couchbase Lite, what are some of the capabilities? So the first and primary is it's an embedded database for offline data access. As I mentioned earlier, it is a lightweight NoSQL document database. It is embedded. So if you're familiar with our server product, right, that's a distributed database, runs across multiple nodes. Right? Couchbase Lite is not the same architecture. Right? It's not a distributed database. It's embedded typically in an application on a device. There's query capabilities with SQL-like semantics, and we'll see this in the demo. Full text search capabilities. Again, if you're familiar with Couchbase Server, full text search capabilities there. We have similar capabilities in Couchbase Lite. We already talked a bit about the data sync to cloud, which is what I'll be demoing in this session. There's also ability to replicate to other Couchbase Lite peers directly, which we won't go into it in this session, and the ability to create on-device database replicas. So typically this is used on Android devices where you can have another SD card or some form of easily removable storage. You can create a replica of the database on that. So if the device gets broken, you can just remove that storage, plug it into another device, and away you go. Asynchronous eventing for reactive applications. So you'll see this in the demo, right? And really, this is a good way for handling changes to data that are being synced to your device in real time, right? Those changes could come at any time. So you need a good way to respond to those changes and take the appropriate action. And then two more that I won't go into in this demo, but will be covered in other sessions. End-to-end encryption, TLS for data in motion from Couchbase Lite through to Sync Gateway through to Couchbase Server, and then options to encrypt the databases on the edge through Couchbase Lite. And then lastly, capabilities to run machine learning models directly on the edge so that you can have more performant mobile apps, incorporate those machine learning models in those apps on the edge, so you don't have to send requests to the server to execute and run against the models there, get the results back. You can have them all on the edge operating in an offline mode. Okay, so from here, we'll walk through the different high-level steps you would take to use Couchbase for mobile. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is add local storage to your app. So if you look on the left, we'll build this out over the slides, but just highlighting some of the different classes and interfaces that you'd work with that are part of Couchbase Lite. So when you're doing this, all of this is through the database class. All right, but first you're going to initialize Couchbase Lite. You're going to create and open a database, and then typically you're going to register a database change listener on that database instance. So in this first demo, I'm going to show how to add a Couchbase Lite framework to an existing Android app and start working with it. Now, this is a basic model view controller based Android app, and we'll be working with a couple of classes here. One is this database manager class that handles all the interactions with Couchbase Lite. And then there's various entities. In this case, we have a profile entity and the activity class where the view logic resides, the presenter class where the business logic resides, and most of the code interacting with the database manager will be in there. All right, so just to give you an idea of the types of things we're working with here in this particular demo. So the first thing that you'll need to do when working with Couchbase Lite is to add the dependency to the Couchbase Lite framework. So in the case of Android, we'll add that to our build.gradle. So now we've got that available in our project. And we'll add some code to our database manager first to initialize Couchbase Lite. So we just simply call the init API on the Couchbase Lite class. And next, we will create and open a database. So we're doing a few things here. We create a database configuration. And for this demo, we're just passing in the path to the directory where we want the database to exist. And then we are opening the database. Now, there's no indication on the UI that any of this has occurred, so we are just going to have a log statement there to write out the info that indeed the database is opened. And then typically you'll want to register a database change listener so you can respond to actions as they occur. on the database. So an example of this is using this user profile database instance, add a change listener, override the changed method. So you can determine the type of change. In this example, we're just writing a log message indicating that something was added / updated or something was deleted. And again, logging something to the console so that we know the listener was added successfully. And then some housekeeping for shutting down the app when the user goes to log out. Want to remove any change listener. So the reference to the change listener that we saved up here, we'll go ahead and tell the user profile database to remove that change listener. We'll log that action. And then lastly, closing the database. So assuming we were able to open it, go ahead and remove any change listeners, close the database, and log the activity. All right, so at this point, we'll go ahead and execute or run our app here and see what it looks like. Okay, make sure we can see the console, bring up the app. So the way the app is coded is once the user clicks sign in, then I will go ahead and try to open the database. So as soon as I click sign in, we should see some entries in the log file. All right, we do see it open database user profile, registered a database change listener on database user profile. And then when the user logs out, I'm not going to try to save anything right now because we don't have the code yet to do the CRUD operations. But when I click log out, it'll go ahead and remove database change listeners and close the database. And then we see that right here. Remove database change listener on database user profile, close database user profile. Okay, so now that you have database incorporated into your app, you've opened the database, and then now you're ready to work with it. The next step is you're going to do some sort of key value or CRUD operations on documents in the database. So there are document objects, right? Certainly you'll have multiple documents stored in your database. The documents can have blobs or attachments associated with them. And again, you'll be seeing this in action in the demo coming up next. Now, the data models in use in the user profile demo, there's two. Remember, we have a user profile database and a university database. The user profile document is pretty simple. It's just a name, email address, a physical address, the university, and this image data, which is the blob that you see referred to over here. So this is a way to store, associate non-JSON data with a document. Typically, these are going to be images, right, but they could be any type of binary data. You use these blobs and attach them to your document. If you've been using Couchbase for a while, you may be familiar with attachments. All right, same idea. So we'll be working mostly with this user profile document through the rest of this session. And in that university database, the pre-built database, it's populated with a number of documents with information about different universities for a quick lookup from the user profile app. But again, we're not going to be doing too much with this, but to give you an idea of what a university document looks like, mainly we'll be working with the name and the country information in those documents. All right, so for this part of the demo, I'll show you how to use the Couchbase Lite key value APIs and how to work with blobs. So first, we are in the presenter code. Remember, this is the classes that deal with the database interaction through the database manager. So when we fetch the user's profile document, we're just simply calling the get document API, passing in the ID or the key of the document we want to get. The way the app is coded is the email address that is used when you log in, that is stored in the database manager and can be retrieved via this get current user doc ID method. And that's used as the key. So basically the email address is the key for the document. So when I log in, the code, the app is going to try to fetch the profile through the key value API. If the document doesn't exist, which it won't the very first time you execute the code, it won't do anything here. It won't be able to get these values. But if it does exist, it'll pull the name, the address, and the associated image data for my profile photo, put it into this profile map, pass that off to the UI code so that it'll update the UI with these values. All right, so that's reading a document. Creating a document is very straightforward as well. So in this case, we use the immutable document class within Couchbase Lite, and that's just a version of a document object that allows you to make changes to it. So I'm creating a new one with the specified ID. Again, this is the email address of the user, passing in this profile map, which for the purposes of our demo right now, it's really just the name, the address, and the image data. So we pass that in and then tell Couchbase Lite to save that document. And then the last portion of this is dealing with blob, or sometimes referred to as attachments, depending on how long you've been working with Couchbase. But now this is, again, the activity classes are dealing with the UI. So the user taps the button to save the profile. We're pulling the name, the email, the address from the form fields on the UI, and we're getting the raw bytes from the profile image. And then these bytes we store in this Couchbase Lite blob object within the document. Okay, so that's the code to read, create, update a document, add a blob. Let's see how this works. Okay, so the app is started up. I'll go ahead and log in. And again, this is the first time I'm running the app with this code for the key value operations, so that document doesn't exist. I'll go ahead and pick my profile photo, enter in my name, and enter in my physical address. Go ahead and save it. And so now at this point, this document is saved in the Couchbase Lite database. And just as to show, or better exercise how this code works, if I log in with a different email address, now it's going to try to retrieve document demo@example.com. That doesn't exist, right? So it's blank again. But if I log back in with my douglasbonser@couchbase.com email address, you'll see that it retrieves the document that we previously saved. Okay, so that's it for the first portion, or the second portion of the demo here with the key value of the CRUD operations. CRUD operations are pretty straightforward, right? Create, update, delete, read, but as you know, it's not always sufficient to be able to work with key values. Sometimes you need to do some secondary lookups, right? Maybe I need to find all the orders for a particular user, or in the context of this demo, all right, I want to find a list of universities maybe that match a certain criteria. So again, in general, the way you would go about this, if you need to do some secondary lookups, is you would create indexes on the data in the database. You'd use the query builder class to build the query that you want to execute. And then you would actually execute that query. So your query builder API is going to return a query, an instance of a query object, and then you would call the execute method on that query object to execute the query, and then iterate over the result set. All right, this portion, now we'll get into querying. All right, we talked about key value access, but sometimes you need more flexible ways to access the data. So for querying, we're going to add some code to our database manager to index some data that we want to query. Now this user profile sample app does come with a pre-built Couchbase Lite database that contains university information. We saw the user profile database in the previous portion of the demo that we created when the user logs in. but do know that this app does include a pre-built, pre-populated database with university information, which is what we're going to leverage to demonstrate the query capabilities. So first thing we want to do is index that data so that our queries will be efficient. So we just create an index against this university database instance, give it a name, and then indicate what attributes in the documents that we want to index. So we want to index the name attribute and the location attribute of each of the documents in this university's database. So pretty straightforward process to build the index. And the next thing we want to do is actually query the data based off of a UI in the app. So the first part is we're going to build our predicate or our where clause. So the UI has two fields where the user can or needs to enter a name and can optionally enter a country. So our where clause is going to be based on this expression where name like the lowercase version of whatever the user entered for the name. And if they provided a country, then the where clause becomes name like user entered name and country like the lowercase version of what the user entered for the country. So there's our where clause. Now we'll build out the rest of the query and just indicating basically select all from our university's database where name like name and potentially country like country. All right, so that's the query. The next thing that you would need to do is actually execute the query. And this is very straightforward. Just simply call the execute method on this query instance, and you'll get back a result set. And then you need to iterate over that result set to update the UI with the list of universities that match or satisfy what the user entered in the UI. So we'll just pull out the name and the country from each of the rows in the result set, add it to this list that will then hand off to the UI to render the list of universities. Okay, so let's run this and see how this looks. Okay, still have all the same data, but you notice there is a new field to select the university, and this is the university name field. I went to Penn State, so I'll search for that. Oops, helps if I could type, right? So there's the list of universities that match it. So I'll pick this and save it. All right, so now I have university information in my user profile. Let's go ahead and log out, close the app. Okay, so now you've seen both key value and secondary lookup or query capabilities in Couchbase Lite. We're going to move on to Sync Gateway. But first, I want to highlight some of the capabilities of Sync Gateway. And I already mentioned this a few slides ago, but first is the authentication and fine-grained access control. Because remember, Sync Gateway is what's allowing or denying access to data in Couchbase server in the cloud or in your private cloud. All right, so you want to make sure that only users who should be accessing that data are accessing that data. Right, and you do have fine-grained control, right? You can control it from a read perspective, a write perspective, a single user, or through roles where maybe multiple users are in the same role. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you can authenticate and grant that access to documents. You have the ability to sync data on demand or continuously. So on demand is what we also sometimes call one-shot replication in Couchbase. And that's typically driven maybe by a timer or based on some user action. And continuous data sync, as the name implies, is running continuously in the background. There's options for one-way and two-way data sync. So you could, from a Couchbase Lite perspective, you could have replication where you're just pushing changes from the device up to Sync Gateway, or you may have a use case where you just need to pull new data from Sync Gateway, or in the case of the demo that you're going to be seeing here, push and pull. All right, so I need to push changes to my user profile up through Sync Gateway, and if any changes are made on the server side, I want to pull those changes down. So that's one-way and two-way data sync. So you'll be seeing all those three in the demo. The next few I won't be going into in the demo, but again, there's plenty of mobile sessions throughout the conference, and some of them will be going into these in a lot more detail. But just for now, know that you do have the ability to sync only the data that's changed, what we call delta sync. So that's very beneficial if you're in scenarios where there may be low bandwidth or very poor connections, right? So you don't have to sync the entire document. You just sync those attributes that changed. Options for more granular data filtering. And this is, think of this at the replication level, right? Whether I'm pushing data or pulling data, I can choose what I want to push up or what I want to pull down, right? So you've, again, got a lot of control over what gets replicated. And lastly, advanced conflict resolution. So there's things like automatic conflict resolution, which is a last right wins, or another option is a conflict-free mode, where Couchbase for Mobile will prevent any conflicts and reject any conflicts that may arise. Right? But again, we won't be going into that in any depth in this session. Plenty of other sessions that will be going into these types of things in more detail. All right, when we talk about authentication, this is really authentication from Couchbase Lite to Sync Gateway. So in your mobile app, you're going to have to connect to Sync Gateway, and you've got to authenticate. We have a number of ways to authenticate. First is anonymous access, which we don't recommend. You may want to use it in a development type environment. Second is basic authentication, which is what I'll be using in this user profile demo, where you just simply provide a username and a password. There's Facebook and Google authentication providers. We provide, make it easy to tie into them. We support OpenID Connect authentication. And then, of course, there's always custom authentication options. For example, LDAP. The last option is going to be a little bit more involved. May require some additional code that you'd have to write external service to do that authentication, but you do have that option available to you if one of these others don't suit your use case. So a very important concept in Couchbase for Mobile is this concept of channels, and this is how we do the data routing in Couchbase for Mobile. So channels, as you see here on the slide, it's handled by Sync Gateway, and the way it works is you control and assign a particular document to a channel or channels in what we call a sync function. And you're going to see that coming up pretty soon in the demo. All right, but for now, just know you have full control over which channels documents can be assigned to. These channels come into existence or are created as documents are assigned to them. Right? So you don't have to worry about trying to predefine every possible channel that you might need. Right? So they're very dynamic in nature, and really think of them as an intermediary between documents and the users. So here's an example, a very small snippet of a sync function, and there's a channel function that's provided by Sync Gateway. You pass in the name or an array of names that channel names that you want to assign this document to. So channel name may be an attribute in the document that is being evaluated by Sync Gateway, or it may be based on multiple values in the document. The point is you've got a lot of flexibility in how you can determine what the channel name may be. Okay, and the way this works is, let's say, for example, document 1, my sync function determines it should be associated with channel 1. Document 2 should be associated with channel 2, and you see these channels coming into existence as the function is executing. And then maybe document 3 might be associated with both channels. So all of these are perfectly valid scenarios with Sync Gateway. All right, so another way to look at this is I've got multiple channels, multiple documents, multiple users. The point is documents can be associated with one or more channels. Users can be associated or have been granted access to one or more channels. So document 1 may be available in both channel 1 and 2. Document 2 only in channel 2. Document 3 over in channel N, and users may have access to multiple channels. Again, the point is very flexible, so you've got full control over which channels you assign documents to. You have full control over which channels users have access to. This is to allow you to partition the data set however you need to based on your use case, allow you to authorize users to access those documents or access those channels based on your use case, with the goal of minimizing the amount of data synced to devices, right? Honestly, it doesn't make sense to sync the entire data set to every device and then do the filtering on the client side, right? This is, you could think of this as a write time filtering. So as changes are being made, as things are passing through Sync Gateway determines, right, or filters and determines which channel documents should be made available on. Okay, and then a little bit more on the access control to show some of the relationships that come into play there. All right, documents are assigned to channels, which we just went through, right? And users have access to channels. I haven't really talked about roles too much, but there's also this concept of roles. Users are assigned to roles, and roles can also have access to channels. So a good way to think of this is maybe like an organizational hierarchy. And there's employees and there's managers, right? And they are all represented by different users. They might have access to their own specific channels, but maybe there's a manager role, right? So any manager user would be assigned to that manager role, and then the role itself can be granted access to different channels, maybe specific to managers. It can be defined statically in the configuration or dynamically in the sync function. All right, so back to this diagram with the different classes and things that you're working with as you build out your app. In the case of adding the sync capability and ensuring that data consistency across the clients and the server, you're going to configure and run Sync Gateway. You're going to define the access control in the Sync Gateway config file, and then you're going to set up replication on the database. All right, so in your code, you'll create a replicator, associate it with an instance of your database. Typically, you're going to implement the replicator change listener interface so you can respond to events that occur while data is being replicated or synced. So now we've already seen key value operations, query operations. So now let's look at the sync operations, right? We just saw quite a bit about these capabilities, so let's see it in action. So we're going to take a look at the Sync Gateway configuration, look at how it handles authorization, data routing, access control. We'll actually run Sync Gateway, and then add some code to the app to start and stop replication. So we'll cover a few highlights of the Sync Gateway config file for this application. The first is this user profile section in the config file, and this is a database in the context of Sync Gateway. So Couchbase Lite, when you start replication, you need to connect to a database on Sync Gateway. So this is the database that we're defining within Sync Gateway. It maps to this Couchbase cluster running in Google Cloud. So I provide the IP address of one of the nodes, and in turn it maps to this user profile bucket in my Couchbase cluster. So that's the basic configuration there of connecting this user profile sync gateway database to my user profile bucket in Couchbase Server. So now let's look at the sync function where it's going to handle the authorization, the data routing, access control. So it's leveraging some of the built-in functions provided by Sync Gateway that you can put in the JavaScript code that comprises your sync function. So in this example, the first thing we're going to do is for authorization, we're going to use the require user function. And basically what this does is when the sync function executes, it's going to validate that the user that is trying to make the change to the document is the same as the user specified in the parameter. And in this case, we're using the email address associated with the user profile. So as long as I'm logged in as user Douglas Bonser at couchbase.com, trying to make a change to my user profile document, that's going to be authorized. I am not going to be able to make a change to somebody else's user profile document. All right, so that's how you can handle authorization. So we've passed that check. We're going to do some data validation and just ensure that email address formats are correct. So assuming I am authorized to change this document, the next thing that we look at is some simple routing. So there's a channel function that we provide, and this is, again, how we do the segregation of the data that we talked about on the slides previously. Basically, we're saying, okay, for this user profile document, go ahead and make it available in the channel based on this combination of channel dot and the email address. So for this user profile demo, when I log in as Douglas Bonser at couchbase.com, and I'm authorized to make the change to my user profile document, Sync Gateway is going to create a channel called channel.douglasbonser at couchbase.com, and that document is now available on that channel and available to anyone who may be listening on that channel. And then the last part is access control. So the user has been authorized to make the change, the document's been made available on the channel, and just last check here to grant access for the user to be able to access a particular channel. Very powerful capabilities you have here with the authorization and the access control. You know, in the context of this demo, it's fairly straightforward. It's pretty much a one-to-one mapping. You know, I'm the only one allowed to update my documents. My document is made available in a channel based on my email address, and I'm granted access to that channel. So there's certainly more interesting use cases that you can implement with this. Right? You could temporarily grant other users access to a channel. You can make documents available in multiple channels. You know, all of the things that you saw in the presentation slides earlier are possible through the use of these built-in functions. Okay, so let's go ahead and run Sync Gateway. And go ahead and move this out of the way. So I'm connected to the GCP VM where I have Sync Gateway installed and already configured. And so it starts up pretty quick, and you see the server has started. I'll go ahead and validate this. I can see that it's already written some information into this user profile bucket. All right, so Sync Gateway is up and running. Now we'll go ahead and add the appropriate code to the database manager to start and stop the replication. So go ahead and get the code here to start the replication. Now we'll walk through the things that are going on here. First is create a URI based on the Sync Gateway endpoint. Right, if you remember, the Sync Gateway defined a database called user profile. Right? So we're here creating a URI based on the Sync Gateway IP address of the VM where Sync Gateway is running. It's acting on the user profile database to create that URI. We create a replicator configuration passing in the user profile database. Again, this is the instance of the local Couchbase Lite database, passing in the URI of Sync Gateway. So now basically think of it as connecting my local user profile database to that endpoint on Sync Gateway. Specify the type of replication I want. I want push and pull replication. So this is from the perspective of the Couchbase Lite client. So I can push changes from the device up to Sync Gateway. I can pull changes that Sync Gateway is making available to me down to my device. I'm using continuous replication, so this is constantly running in the background. So this will push the changes up as soon as they're made, pull the changes down as soon as they're available. And I'm going to use that basic authentication. You saw that there are a number of authentication options available, but for this demo, we're just passing in the username and password with basic authentication. And the last thing is on the configuration, set the channels that I want to replicate on. So we saw how those channels are created within the sync function. And so I've got corresponding code here in my client to replicate on the channel dot and username, again, which is the email address. So once I have all that configuration, I create a new replicator, passing in the config, and then you can add change listener, or just like we had database change listeners, there's replicator change listeners. And in this case, we create one of those, override the changed method, and really just for logging purposes, right? But this is how you can respond to changes in the status of the replicator, whether it's started or stopped, things like that. So once everything is set up, we'll actually start the replicator. And now Couchbase Lite will be replicating data back and forth, and some housekeeping. When the user logs out, the app shuts down. All right, we want to remove the replicator change listener from the replicator and then stop the replicator. All right, so we'll go ahead and see what this looks like when we run it. Now, the way the app is coded is that as soon as I tap sign in, that code that you just saw to start the replicator, that code is going to get executed. So I want to explain that before I actually tap on sign in. I signed in, and now you see some of the information in Sync Gateway that a replication has already occurred, right? Because as soon as I tapped sign in, start up the replicator, there's already that user profile document in my local Couchbase Lite database. All right, so Couchbase Lite realizes, hey, I've got a change here that I need to push up to Sync Gateway. And Sync Gateway is then in turn going to write that Couchbase server. We can see that here. There it is. All right, and there's the user profile document. So the name, the email, the university, the address information, and the blob representing the image. You can see all of that there. Okay, so now I'm able to sync data back and forth, but how do I know when data has changed? Right? I know when the data has changed based on some user input locally, but how do I know something has changed maybe on the server side or potentially on another device? Whatever the source, the point is it's a document that is coming from another source and that Couchbase Lite is trying to pull down. So how do I know when that data has changed? Similar to what we did with the university's database and querying that, you'll still use the same query builder API, but there's a query change listener interface. And then what that is going to do is every time the result set of that query changes, your callback basically that's implemented in the listener is going to get executed. So best way to think of it is And anytime the result set changes, meaning there's a change to the user profile document, if it's a use case where it's maybe like a list, all right, or maybe another document got added to my list or a document got removed from my list, all right, all of these would be changes that you would get notified on. And then you can take the appropriate action, which is iterate over that result set, update your UI, or take some other action. All right, so first let me log out of the mobile app and close that as we prepare to make some more changes. But what we're going to look at now is basically how do you know when data has changed, right? We have this continuous push and pull replication setup, so changes could be pulled down to the app at any time. How, and you need to respond to that, right? So what we have in Couchbase Lite, as we saw on the previous slides, is this concept of a query change listener, so that as the result set of that query changes, you're notified and can take the appropriate action. So let's go ahead and add some code or change some code in our app to be able to use this. So if you remember, we already had some code in here to read a document using the key value API to get the user profile. So we're going to change this to use this live query or this query listener concept. So there's a couple of steps. The first is to build the query. We already saw this with the university information, but this is a simpler query. So we're just select all from the database where the document ID of the document in the database is equal to the current user doc ID or email address. So simply put, I'm saying just select my user profile document from the database. So that's the query that is going to run. Now this is the key here, this query change listener, that you register on the query instance, and then there's a changed method that you will implement to take the appropriate action whenever the result set changes, meaning whenever the user profile document gets changed. So in this case, I'm going to iterate over the result set, even though there's only going to be one result in it. Just going to pull all the information, the name, the address, the university, the image data, pull it all out, put it into this map, pass it off to the UI so that the UI can update appropriately. And then the last and most important step is I actually need to execute this query. All right, with this approach, all right, this query is going to be executed every time, or every time data changes. This query change listener is going to kick in, and your changed method is going to be called so that you can respond to those changes. All right, so it's easier probably to see this in action. So I'm going to start up another instance of an Android emulator representing maybe a tablet. So, right, we all have multiple devices, and we typically have the same apps running, or same apps installed. So for this demo, right, I could access my user profile on my phone. I could access it on my tablet. I can update it either place, right, but I want to be able to keep it in sync. So let me log in here. Okay, so there's my user profile as we left it. Now remember, the replication doesn't start until after you click sign in. And since this is the first time this app is running on my tablet device, there is no Douglas Sponsor at Couchbase.com profile document. So you'll see the screen is going to be empty for about half a second until the replicator kicks in and pulls down the document. Right? So there you see the user profile document on both devices. Now I could go in, if you're like me, typically I like to use my tablet instead of my phone. So maybe I go in at some point later on, update my user profile on the tablet. I can save the change, and it's going to go ahead and get pushed up to Sync Gateway. Sync function is going to run. The document's going to be made available on my Douglas Sponsor at Couchbase.com channel. Again, because I've logged in with that email address and both of these devices, they're both listening on that channel. So as soon as that change hits Sync Gateway, it gets pulled down by the other device. All right, so easy way to keep the data on multiple devices in sync with each other. So now we've seen the data syncing, and we've seen the ability to be notified when data changes, or what we call a live query. So now what we're going to do, we want to extend this a little bit out past Couchbase Server, right, on the server side. So you're changing your user profile here in your mobile app. It's going up through Sync Gateway, being written to Couchbase Server. But with Couchbase Server, you also have the ability to trigger some action on the server as these changes are occurring. So you can leverage the eventing service within Couchbase Server, deploy a function to that, and take the appropriate action. In the case of our user profile app in this demo, what our function is going to do is respond to any changes in user profile documents by calling out to a third-party REST API that sends emails. So we've seen how, again, just to recap, right, we've seen how to do CRUD operations on the data in the local Couchbase Lite database, how to query, how to sync the data from the edge to Couchbase Server, and even keep the data across multiple devices in sync. But now we're going to take this a step further and show how we can leverage one of the capabilities of Couchbase Server to take action based on changes that are occurring out here on the edge. So leveraging the eventing capability of Couchbase Server, and this allows you to deploy your own JavaScript code to take action based on changes to data. So in this particular function, I'm responding to changes in user profile documents, and what I want to do is send an email to them notifying them that their profile has been updated, right? That's pretty common whenever we update any of our profile information with the companies we deal with. We typically get a confirmation email. So in this function, once I've checked that this is indeed a user profile document, I'm going to pull the email address that I want to send to. I'm going to pull the name, the physical address, the university, create the body that this third-party email service requires. Execute a curl command, send it all off to that third-party REST service, and then I'll receive an email from that. So let's see what this looks like here. Go ahead, and first of all, I need to deploy this. This will take a few moments. Okay, the function has been deployed. So let's see what this looks like. So I can go ahead and close that. Don't need that anymore. And then we'll bring up the email client so we can see these emails as they come through. So I'll go ahead and change my mailing address, save it. So now it's going through Sync Gateway, being written into Couchbase Server. The eventing function fires, creates the email, calls a third-party REST API, which sends the email to me. So by the time I got done explaining all that, we already had the email. You've seen the ability to trigger action on the server from a change on the edge. The last thing that we want to talk about, and the last thing we want to add in here, is really mobile and non-mobile clients sharing the same data, or edge and server side clients accessing the same data. So over here on your devices, you're using the Couchbase Lite SDKs to work with the data. Over here on the server side, you're using the Couchbase Server SDKs to work with the data. The other really nice thing that Couchbase for mobile does is allow you to seamlessly sync changes that occurred out here on the edge so that they're available all the way back here in a backend system and vice versa. I can make a change here in a backend system and that change is in real time propagated out to these edge devices. Okay, so first I want to show you what you need to do to enable that shared access that we just talked about. So in the Sync Gateway config file that we saw earlier in the user profile section, there's this enable shared bucket access setting. Set that to true. And now what that is going to enable is synchronizing changes made to documents, whether they're through the Couchbase Lite SDK on the edge or through the Couchbase Server SDK or Nickel queries in the cloud. So let's take a look and see what that looks like in action. So I still have my mobile phone emulator up and running. Now I'm going to bring up a node-based web application that, for the purposes of this demo, is for like customer service. If I call in and I need to update my profile, in theory, this could be the system that they might use for that. So I'll go ahead and enter the email. Look up that user. There's my user information. And then could go ahead and change the address in this case. So you see that change now got synchronized back down to the client. And that eventing function is still deployed, still running. So in a moment, we'll see that email, again, like we saw before with the updated information. All right, and that's the end of this demo. Okay, so with that, that wraps up the session. Just a short list of some other relevant Connect sessions dealing with mobile that you may be interested in. So please do check them out. And with that, thanks for your time. And hopefully you learned something new. And hopefully you're looking at trying out Couchbase for mobile. All right, enjoy the rest of Connect.